Hey everybody, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. I'm glad you're here for what I believe is going to be a really fun show today. Later on, we'll speak to Mike Griffith, who had a really interesting piece last night at DawgNation.com about Georgia offensive lineman Cade Mays. Now, we're not sure exactly which position along the offensive line Mays is going to be in on Saturday. There's been some chatter about that at practice this week. But we do know that he could play a crucial role for the Dogs, and it's a big game for him because he's playing the school Tennessee, to which he was once committed. We'll talk to Mike about that and have a whole lot more fun in addition to that, including off the top. Do you remember what Aaron Murray said about Jeremy Pruitt back in the summer? There's a chance that Murray ends up being right about that all along. We'll talk about that and so much more as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I got to tell you, it is fun to be getting ready for a rivalry game on Saturday. Georgia-Tennessee is one of those that if you're my age in your 40s or even really younger, older, I think it spans generations. It's become one of those games that is really one of the most memorable moments of any season. How does Georgia do against Tennessee? Every Dog fan can tell you where they were for the big wins. Every Dog fan, unfortunately, can tell you where they were for the disappointing losses. So heading towards the rivalry on Saturday, I think is something that's really fun for a lot of Dog Nation here. And in preparation for what's going to happen on Saturday at 3:30, we were talking off the air a bit this week, and our buddy Michael, one of our producers, brought to mind, hey, you remember what Aaron Murray, the former Georgia quarterback, said about Jeremy Pruitt back during the summer? SEC Media Days this year was in Atlanta. The radio station, I believe, if memory serves me correct, and slap me on the wrist if I'm wrong about this, was 104.5 The Zone in Nashville, Tennessee. Pruitt, who I should say Murray, who in addition to being a former Georgia quarterback, is now an analyst for the CBS Sports Network. He's also an occasional friend of us here on DawgNation Daily as well. He was sitting down. The question comes up of, hey, what do you think about Jeremy Pruitt? How do you think it's going to go for Pruitt there at Tennessee? Now, the backstory here is, when you're an analyst on a sort of a hometown radio station, the thing that you're supposed to do, or at least what most analysts do, is kind of toss a little red meat to the crowd, whatever the audience is expecting to hear. Maybe you give them a little dose of that. At least you try to do it as in kind of way as possible. Murray, though, goes the opposite direction, which credit for him. First of all, if you're a Georgia fan, you kind of love the idea of Murray going in on Pruitt. If you're just an objective analyst in terms of evaluating how another analyst is performing, I guess Murray earned some respect here because he, at the time, back in the summer, let us know that he had no intentions of being impressed with what Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt was going to do. Let me let you hear this from last summer in light of what we know about Jeremy Pruitt now. Here's Aaron Murray.
First off, talent-wise, they're far behind right now. I mean, talent-wise, it's not even close with them. South Carolina, Florida, Georgia. It's not there. So, I mean, he has a huge mountain to climb just to get them competitive in this league right now. And two, honestly, I don't know if his personality is fit to be a head coach. I don't. As a head coach, there's so many things that go into it. It's not just going out there and coaching. You have to deal with front office. You have to go talk with the president of the university. You have to deal with boosters. You have to deal with the offense, the defense. It's not just going there and dealing with the kids and scheming up. There's a lot that goes into it. I don't think he's the right guy to kind of be the CEO of a corporation. He's really good managing just a defense and being a defensive coordinator. He needs to prove to me that he can handle the whole ship. For right now, I don't think he can.
This was very controversial. When Aaron Murray first said this. The reaction from Tennessee fans was strong. The reaction from the rest of the SEC was kind of curious. Wow, here's a pretty provocative opinion. It's more than what you come to expect from the sort of typical SEC Media Days gathering here. It got a lot of attention. And it's worth remembering here that when Murray said this, the first part of his comment was just as controversial as the second. The idea that Tennessee doesn't have a whole lot of talent. Well, pretty clearly Murray's been proven right on that. We've seen that against Florida on Saturday, against West Virginia in week 1. You can really look up and down the starters for both the Vols on offense and defense, and you can really wonder, where is the talent for Tennessee and how big of a rebuilding job has Jeremy Pruitt gotten himself into? The second part of that may also eventually be proven true as well. The idea that Jeremy Pruitt doesn't quite have the demeanor to be a head coach. Murray went on to explain why it was that he questioned the personality, the demeanor of Pruitt, and it's pretty pointed remarks. You may remember it, but here it is one more time as a reminder.
Mine is when he was at Georgia, and the way he acted, the way he treated Coach Rick, I thought was poor. He wasn't as respectful as I thought a defense coordinator should be to a head coach. So that's my thing with authority. When he's dealing with the athletic director, when he's dealing with the president, when he's dealing with a booster who's giving millions of dollars, you can't go tell him to screw off. You have to take the meeting. You got to sit with them. Yeah, I know you want to be game planning and getting ready for the game, but you're a head coach now. You have to do these other things. Like I said, I think he's a really good defensive coordinator. I think when he has one mission, he's really good. But when you have to be pulled in 100 different directions, you have to be respectful and sit in all this other stuff. He needs to show me he can do that. I'm not saying he can't. He needs to show me he can, and that's his biggest hurdle as a head coach.
In a lot of ways, this is a conversation as old as time itself, at least in terms of football. You're pretty good as a coordinator, but can you do all the things that a CEO-style head coach in the modern game is supposed to do? It's interesting that it's a former Georgia quarterback talking about a former Georgia defensive coordinator, now Tennessee head coach, but the conversation itself is not all that unique. We've been having some version of this now for a while. Before I get to the fact that Murray may actually end up being right about all of this, and as a way of being sort of fair and balanced here, let me also let you hear Jeremy Pruitt's response to the Aaron Murray comments at SEC Media Days. Here's what he said from the podium.
Well, first of all, I coached against Aaron, and he was a fantastic player, great competitor. But, I grew up a coach's son, so when you're standing on the sideline, your dad's high school team is going 2-8. The folks up in the stands, even in Rainsville, Alabama, they're not real happy. So I realized at an early age that everybody has an opinion, and my dad told me, he said, as long as they pay their money, son, they can say whatever they want to. So I'm going to worry about the things that I can control, and I know who I am, and I'm comfortable with that.
So here's what's fascinating as Tennessee gets ready to come into Athens on Saturday. Jeremy Pruitt, back at SEC Media Days, in response to Aaron Murray's criticism, says, I'm going to worry about the things that I can control. But the point that Aaron Murray was making back in July was, I'm not so sure that Pruitt's capable of controlling himself. And you know what? After Tennessee's most recent game, there is some evidence to support the questions that Murray had about Pruitt back then. I mean, we showed you this video early in the week. Pruitt kicking the whiteboard on the sideline there. Now, that in itself is not that big of a deal. Steve Spurrier was throwing his visor 30 years ago. Kirby Smart certainly, shows some emotion on the sideline. The problem is with, memes or GIFs or, whatever you want to do, it ends up being the snapshot of the ineptitude that Tennessee was showing on the field and Pruitt's helplessness to kind of handle all of that. That piece of video there does speak to what Aaron Murray said of, does this guy have the demeanor to have a big home game with 93,000 people, or in Tennessee's case, I guess it's 100,000 people in the stadium, honoring the 1998 national champions there, huge environment, and then going out and totally falling flat on your face, laying the biggest egg possible, and then on the sideline stand there with nothing more than a frustrated look on your face because you can do nothing to stop that. And that's, maybe, a debatable and subjective, but what's not debatable, what's completely objective is the bad look for Jeremy Pruitt when Sept is seen leaving the sideline after the game during the game on Saturday. In his post-game press conference, Pruitt says, I told him to leave because we asked him to go in the game and then he didn't want to do it. And then Sept goes on social media to tell his side of the story without the sanctioned, permission from the Tennessee here, completely refuting, and you can see that on your screen if you're watching us, what Sept had to say about that, completely refuting Jeremy Pruitt's side of the story. I'm sorry, but the entire Sept ordeal, Sept saying on Twitter that, no, it didn't happen the way that Jeremy Pruitt said. I didn't refuse to go in the game. Pruitt saying otherwise, and a player leaving the field during the game, whether he chose to do that or because Pruitt kicked him off the sideline, that does speak to a demeanor issue for Pruitt. And is he capable of controlling the Tennessee team and himself and his own emotions here? When you look back on some of the things that happened at Georgia, like Aaron Murray was doing back in the summer, that makes all those questions even the more relevant. Yes, as Tennessee comes into Georgia on Saturday, this is a team and a program whose wheels could come off of the 2018 season before you even turn the calendar to October. There is a ton of pressure on Pruitt in this game. Not to win outright, I don't think that's a possibility, but to even keep it closer after already really getting beaten up by Florida and West Virginia. Now, for what it's worth, back to the Georgia side of things here for a moment, as you might imagine, and I feel like I say this kind of a lot, Kirby Smart's not paying attention to any of this. Whatever drama might happen at Tennessee, whatever the media might say about that Tennessee drama, Kirby Smart's, as he said before, keeping the main thing. The main thing here is Kirby.
The biggest thing for us is us. We've got to really concern ourselves with that. I mean, I think the perception out there is some people look at Tennessee and say certain things. I look at Tennessee and say that's a really well-coached, hard-nosed, fundamental football team that's coming in here off a situation where they had, however many turnovers they had. the focus for our players is this is always a tough physical game. It's always this kind of way. It's been close for years, and we got to worry about us. We got to go correct our mistakes and our problems and make sure that we got our stuff tightened up so that we can play the best we can play.
I think Kirby Smart's making a pretty interesting point there, and I think what he's alluding to is don't be so quick to assume that Tennessee is as bad as it looked on Saturday against Florida, and the program is as in dire of a condition as I just suggested it was. A stat to back up Kirby's point here, if you look at the Florida scoring drives on Saturday, the length of those drives, 4 plays, 2 plays, 1 play, 1 play, 7 plays, 1 play. A lot of short drives aided by Tennessee turnover. I don't think that Georgia can expect to get that many gifts from the Vols on Saturday, the way that they were doling out turnovers to the Gators this past Saturday there in Neyland Stadium. The kind of game where Georgia is going to have to probably buckle its chin strap. Tennessee is fighting to save its season here, maybe even fighting to save its coach, Jeremy Pruitt. Ultimately, I don't think that Pruitt's got enough control over his own team right now or the situation in the SEC to matter all that much, and I don't believe this team is talented enough to give Georgia a real game on Saturday, but it sounds like Kirby's keeping his focus on the Vols while everybody else is focused on the way that Tennessee might be falling apart, and that decision from the Georgia coach is probably the right one. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. It was fun to be on with the morning show this morning, by the way, with my friends on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. I love doing that every Wednesday. Got a chance to do that today, and it was great. Also, podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player for the Android devices, world-famous DawgNation.com, and really, I guess, however else you listen on the Android devices. I don't know a ton about the Android stuff, but y'all seem to be well taken care of over there, so I'm happy to know that. And also for those of you who listen to world-famous DawgNation.com, thanks for doing that as well. And a big thanks to Marco's Pizza for making it all possible. Got some more tweets yesterday. I love seeing these messages from the folks who take advantage of that great offer from Marco's, including, by the way, not just here in the state of Georgia, where we typically think of as DawgNation, all the way out, Arizona and places like that. I'm hearing from people who are enjoying some of Marco's Pizza and taking advantage of 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for $6.99 each. The great thing about that is there's no coupon to clip, no promo code to remember. It's every store, every day, the Italian way, and we love having Marco's.com right here on DawgNation Daily. Before I speak to Mike Griffith, our buddy from DawgNation.com, let's also go around the doghouse here today, brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I want to spend a minute talking about the situation with Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm as we kind of move towards the 5th game of the season on Saturday. Fromm still mentioned among the favorites for the Heisman Trophy, although the odds are dropping just a little bit here. Brett McMurphy on his Twitter feed has been doing a pretty good job of kind of chronicling a lot of this. As you might imagine, Tua Tagovailoa is running away with this right now. He is 2-3 to win the award, which means he's essentially a favorite over the rest of the field. This is from the Las Vegas Superbook, which is the Westgate Hotel Casino. Haskins, the Ohio State quarterback, Kyler Murray, the Oklahoma quarterback, both at 5-1. Then you get down to both DeAndre Swift and Jake Fromm here, along with the Oregon quarterback Justin Herbert, both 50-1 to win the award. So Fromm still mentioned here in the midst of the top guys to win the award, even if his odds are dropping, probably at the expense of the rise of Tua Tagovailoa. And if you want to know more than any other reason why Jake Fromm might be in that discussion right now as both a big offensive leader for Georgia, especially in the second half on Saturday, we'll talk more to Mike Griffith about that in just a moment, but why he's also in, potentially in that conversation for some postseason honors here at the end of the season is because some of the work that he's been doing when facing pressure. Now, credit to the Georgia offensive line. He hasn't faced pressure a lot, but when he has, he's done really well with it, as pointed out by Pro Football Focus this week, who give you the numbers for Jake Fromm against Missouri when he saw pressure this week. On 11 attempts facing blitzes, he completed 7 passes on those 11 attempts for 146 yards, 2 touchdowns, for a passer rating of 146.8. That's what a veteran quarterback's able to do for Georgia. Right now, Georgia's got one in Jake Fromm here in his second year and seemingly getting more comfortable there. Now, it wasn't a great first half for Fromm on Saturday. Even he would acknowledge that. But clearly, he's more comfortable in this role in his second season than he was in his first. In fact, Kirby Smart talked about that a bit on Monday.
Well, I think he's able to make quicker, smarter decisions. He processes information really quick. He understands what defenses are trying to do. He's in the second year in our system. He's got more experienced wideouts. We had good wideouts last year, but the kids this year, there's a bigger body of work. So they've made some plays for him too. You look at last year. I know early, Miko had a couple drops. We had a couple things that they're catching the ball better now, and I don't think it was that he was less accurate last year. Some of them weren't called, and he understands where the check down is. He knows how to use the tools that are around him.
Mike Griffith used a really interesting word in one of his pieces this week at DawgNation.com, the idea of momentum. Georgia establishing some of that in the second half, maybe against Missouri. Let's see if Fromm and the rest of this Georgia offense can take that momentum into the game on Saturday. Huge favorite against the Vols. I think a lot of Georgia fans are looking forward to hopefully seeing a lot of points scored by the home team there that day. Around the Doghouse here this Wednesday on DawgNation Daily is brought to you by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You know what they do. They provide foundation repair, basement waterproofing, and crawl space encapsulation. They also offer a lifetime of support. That's why you want to call them right now. Number super easy to remember. That's 678-ESOG now. 678-ESOG now. Of course, the ESOG stands for Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You can have one of their qualified professional technicians come out to your home, check for a cracked foundation or a wet basement or a damp crawl space, whatever it is. ESOG can take good care of you. They're the only ones that we would trust here at DawgNation, and the number one reason why is because they're the only foundation repair company with a full-time engineer on staff. We love that about Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You'll love them as well. Check them out by giving them a call at 678-ESOG now. That number one more time, 678-ESOG now. Speaking of dialing numbers, we have dialed the number for our buddy Mike Griffith, and here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, let's talk to him about everything as Georgia gets ready for the Vols on Saturday. Good to have you with us on the program here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to Mike Griffith, who is just every single week, burning it on both ends, getting you ready for the upcoming game on Saturday. Great coverage from Columbia, Missouri this past week, and it's rolled right into a rivalry game that many of us hold very dear to our hearts with Tennessee this upcoming Saturday. Mike, thanks for the hard work there at DawgNation.com. We love reading every word. We appreciate you being on our program today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, BA. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and let me start with something that you wrote and published last night, if you don't mind, because I think that actually I'll get to the Cade Mays thing in a minute. Let me do something on the heels of what I was just talking about before we get to Mays, because I was talking about the quarterback situation before you joined us, and I thought you used a really interesting word in terms of one of the things that you wrote about Fromm after Saturday's game, where the second half was probably, and even Jake Fromm admitted this, you had a great video interview with him up at DawgNation.com where he talked about leaving points on the field in the first half. Second half, much better than the first. You talked about the idea of momentum, taking what worked for the Georgia offense in the second half and maybe bringing that back to Athens on Saturday against Tennessee, and really kind of getting this cranked up as Georgia gets ready to play, as you know, some incredibly tough football games at LSU. Kentucky on the road looks much tougher. Auburn still looms here. You want the Georgia offense firing on all cylinders. Do you think what happened in the second half against Missouri sets Jake Fromm and this Georgia offense to start doing that on Saturday against Tennessee?
Yeah, I think Jake found some trust with Riley Ridley, just going downfield and kind of cutting the cord a little bit. I mean, let's be fair to Jake Fromm here. I mean, not that we need to apologize for the guy, because he's completing about 80% of his passes, one of the most efficient passers in the country. But I think he has missed Javon Wims, and the fact that Terry Godwin has been hobbled. He hasn't looked like himself yet. That's the leading returning receiver. I mean, Jake's got to get comfortable with the new supporting cast. I mean, he's got new guys. He's getting his timing down with. I mean, we still haven't seen Demetrius Robertson catch any passes. Tyler Simmons went out of the game in the first quarter with a shoulder injury. And so, for him and Riley Ridley to connect downfield, of course, McCole had another big game. J.J. Holloman with a huge touchdown. These are important things as Jake Fromm moves forward. You'd like to see quarterbacks and receivers get in sync, but, Georgia's got so many receivers here. He's throwing to 18 different guys on a daily basis. So it's good that he's starting to get dialed in with some familiar faces. We're starting to see a little bit of rhythm in that pass game, and I think that's really important for the vertical passing game. We talked last week about Jake's inefficiency on 3rd and 10 or longer, and when he was in that situation at Missouri, the first throw he had was an interception. In the second half, he converted. I think some confidence was gained from those downfield throws, and I think the timing couldn't be better because Tennessee is going to play a lot of press coverage, and Georgia's going to have to go downfield to make some plays against the Vols.
And then one of the names you mentioned there in terms of his comfort level with some of his receivers, what I've been impressed by is what's happened with J.J. Holloman. That's just 6 catches on the year for Holloman, but 2 of those have gone for touchdowns, including the very memorable moment against Missouri on Saturday for maybe some of the wrong reasons, but nonetheless was an incredible catch by Holloman to turn that into a touchdown the way that he did. seeing the way that Fromm and Holloman are getting some chemistry here to go along with McCole, who's been huge, and Ridley, who I think a lot of fans had high expectations for coming into the year. It's the emergence of Holloman here that I think could eventually make that Georgia offense incredibly dangerous.
Well, just another weapon for sure. And like I said, we still haven't seen Demetrius Robertson catch the pass yet. He's touched the ball twice on jet sweeps. But, and the MTSU coach noticed him too. I remember his comments, and I mean, Stockstill, he was such a beaten down guy after that game, and then they bring in Notre Dame, and he hadn't even played. It's like, he's just standing over on he's thinking to himself, this guy would have caught 40 balls for me at MTSU, and he's like the 8th guy off the bench at Georgia. But this is where the recruiting kicks in, DA, is when you've got this sort of depth and this sort of talent at the skill positions. And, I think we're going to see more James Cook emerge in the backfield. They've asked Elijah Holyfield and maybe a little bit of a banged-up DeAndre Swift to really carry the load. And I think we need to see James Cook emerge a little bit more. I think we need to see a little bit more production from Brian Harry. And, I mean, that's an area of the team that can get a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's all well said, Mike, in that regard. Now, I tried to jump the gun off the top. I was so excited about asking about Cade Mays, and I almost completely skipped over what we had planned on Jake Fromm. But let me do a little Cade Mays stuff with you because I thought you wrote a very interesting piece about Mays last night. I do think this is one of the rich storylines for this game on Saturday. It may still be a blowout Georgia win, but for Mays in particular, this is going to be an emotional game. I know he's going to hear this some from the Tennessee side. I think they were doing some of that with Jacob Copeland on Saturday because of the fact they thought Copeland might go to a Tennessee. Ultimately, he obviously chose the Florida Gators. You probably get more of that with Mays here this particular Saturday because he's probably going to be on the field a whole lot more and just a much bigger deal here given the fact that his family's had such deep ties there at the university. How compelled are you by this storyline of Mays for the first time, and it could be a lot of these battles over the next 3 or 4 years, but Mays for the first time here against Tennessee this weekend?
Well, I think Cade Mays decommitting from Tennessee was the final dagger for Butch Jones. I think that's when the decision was essentially made that, now you've lost the bell cow in the signing class. Butch was consequently fired 3 or 4 days later after he fell to 4-6 with a loss to Missouri. But I think that decommit was the final nail in the coffin for the Butch Jones era. And certainly, Cade was a huge addition to Georgia. We realized at the time. I don't think we realized how much impact he would have now. He was, I don't want to use the word afterthought because there's so many 5-stars that are competing for time, but it just so happened that Andrew Thomas went out with an injury against South Carolina, and Cade Mays had been the guy working there, and Sam Pittman felt confident enough in Cade to play him in the second half at South Carolina in a road game. I mean, that's a tough environment for a true freshman to go in. And there was Cade Mays out there against Will Muschamp and his celebrated, supposedly upset, happy South Carolina team. And by the end, and Cade was out there for 3 touchdown drives, and by the end of he was playing in front of a pretty much empty stadium because all the South Carolina fans bailed on their team, and Georgia kind of took over that stadium. And they felt good enough about Cade that he played the whole next game against Middle Tennessee. So Thomas comes back. I think a little bit of a surprise start. Wonder if it was rushed a little bit. Not going to lie to you. But Thomas comes back against Missouri, re-injures the ankle. Cade goes back out there again. Then Cleveland goes down. So what do we see this week? Kirby's moving Cade Mays to right guard. So it tells you a lot about how much Georgia believes in Cade Mays, that they're looking at him at yet another position. Again, this is a true freshman. This isn't some seasoned veteran. He hasn't even been through an entire season on the Georgia campus. So he's been very important to Georgia. And conversely, imagine how much he would be helping at Tennessee right now.
Oh, yeah.
And how big of a get that would have been. And let me tell you, after they fired Butch, Philip Fulton made a personal pitch. And Philip, as we know, is one of the greatest recruiters in the history of college football. Georgia fans remember Jamal Lewis, Cozy Coleman, Deion Grant. Those were cornerstones to a championship team that came out of Georgia that Philip recruited. Philip could not turn him. They could not flip Jeremy Pruitt. All the talk about his recruit, they could not flip him back to Tennessee. His hometown, Knoxville, Cade Mays was sold on Georgia and competing for championships in Athens.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subplot there, and obviously Georgia fans are very happy with the way that worked out. Mike, it's a great read there at DawgNation.com. Talk to me about the Georgia running backs here for a moment, because when you look at the overall numbers, you see Holyfield averaging more than 8 yards a carry. Maybe you want a little bit more from DeAndre Swift. Overall, it probably doesn't look all that bad, and yet I think for some Georgia fans, they are maybe hoping for a little bit more from the Georgia running game than what we've seen through the first 4 games thus far. I guess if we want to kind of view this as the 1/3 mark of the season here, or really, after this week we'll be 5 games in, getting close to the halfway point. What do you make of what you've seen from the Georgia running backs thus far this season?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been really impressed with Elijah Holyfield's durability and toughness. I mean, he's a GOAT. He's a guy you can count on. You can hand him the ball. A good ball security so far. Runs tough. And if he can catch the ball, that's an area that Kirby's talked about. He's got to learn to catch the ball. It's the one thing. It's one of the 2 things, I think, that Elijah would need to solve if he wants to play at the next level. He's got to catch the ball better, and he's got to get a little bit more breakaway speed. Now, Swift, conversely, brings you that speed, but I'm wondering a little bit about his durability. Only 2 series against Middle Tennessee. Hasn't really shown me he can be the bell cow back. Hasn't shown me he can take over a game yet. I don't think he has a 100-yard rushing performance yet. And as you said, we're going into the 5th game of the season. So it's a little piecemeal. Herring really hasn't done a whole lot with his opportunities. Georgia had a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and 1 against Missouri. And Holyfield got a carry and Herring got a carry. They were both stopped. Okay? Let that sink in. Georgia was stopped on a 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 at Missouri. Not at Auburn, not at Alabama, okay? At Missouri. Not at LSU, at Missouri. So there's some concern about the short yardage running system. Now, I don't know that James Cook is the answer for short yardage, but I do think we're going to see him take an expanded role because he's a playmaker. He's a guy with home run speed. He can catch the ball. He's got good vision, and I think he's the player that can make a difference in the backfield the second half of the season.
We'll get back to more talk on the Georgia Bulldogs on the football field here in a moment. Let's take a bit of time right now to celebrate the work that UGA is doing in the classroom as well. And as many of you are very well aware, and proud of this in your own regard, the Georgia investment has an outstanding return. Experts agree that Georgia is the number 12 best value public university according to Kiplinger's. With an exceptional college experience inside the classroom and out, and unique career preparation, opportunities available for every student, the UGA degree is indeed incredibly valuable. And right now, UGA is committed to excellence and affordability for all those seeking higher education. We open doors for students and graduates to succeed at every level, and we'll never stop our pursuit of a better world, which is one of the reasons why so many of us are so proud of the work that UGA is doing. And if you're interested in continuing UGA's mission of excellence and being a part of the great work that's happening on campus, please visit this website, give.uga.edu. That website, once again, give.uga.edu, and you can learn how you can invest in UGA's future and what a bright future it is for the Georgia Bulldogs, just as bright there in the classroom and on the academic side as it is in the athletic side here right now, and that makes all of us incredibly proud. Mike, back to the situation in football here just for a moment. We talked about Georgia and its ability to run the football. Against Missouri on Saturday, there were also some issues in stopping the run. And Kirby this week, when he's spoken to you guys there in Athens every day, has talked about the fact that this Tennessee team may be sneaky better at running it than you think. We kind of discussed some of those numbers before you join us on today's show. Do you believe Kirby? Do you take him at face value when he says, hey, watch out for a more physical Vols team than some people realize? Or is this just the coach speak, what you're forced to do when you know that you're a 30-point favorite and you got to try to keep your team motivated?
Oh, no. Hey, we saw Dominion beat Virginia Tech last week. I mean, football is a funny game, and things can change quickly. And Kirby Smart knows that better than anyone. And Georgia fans know that better than anyone. How many times have we seen a Tennessee team that was supposed to have no chance beat Georgia? I think I remember covering a game around 2007 when Matt Stafford came to Knoxville and laid a pretty big egg. And not to suggest that I think that will happen, because I don't. I think Georgia will win this game comfortably. But it's Kirby's job to get these guys ready every week. And what Tennessee is going to commit to do is they are going to commit to run the ball. I wrote a story earlier this week. It's the only chance Tennessee has to stay close in this game is if they can run the ball effectively. Now, the number that stood out from Missouri is that Missouri averaged 5.3 yards on 1st and 10 runs. And that's relevant, because if you can put your quarterback in a 2nd and 5, now all of a sudden the defense is guessing. They can't pin their ears back and rush the quarterback. So First down run production is a very key stat. The game before against MTSU, they also averaged 5.3 yards. Now, Kirby said they weren't really trying to defend the run there because of the way MTSU ran all those RPOs, a little bit different style offense. But he admitted he was concerned with the run defense against Missouri. Now, Kirby Smart tells us it's a mindset. He tells us it's an approach, it's an attitude. Listen, to an extent it is, but at some point we've got to wonder, are these guys just not good enough? I mean, is this the area of the team where the recruiting has not been up to par, is on that defensive line? Because so far, we've seen, I believe, opponents now have 17 tackles for loss against Georgia, and Georgia's only got 13 tackles for loss against them. Georgia's got 3 sacks. I think I heard Alabama's got 14 or 15 or something like that. I mean, at some point, it's not the scheme and it's not the situation. At some point, you've got to look at the personnel and ask yourself, is this an area where Georgia is going to fall short in terms of measuring up, and that's on the defensive front.
Let me do a couple quick injury-related deals before we let you go here. In terms of stopping the run against Tennessee, what would have helped last Saturday against Missouri is more of Monty Rice. It sounds like we may see more of Rice returning to that linebacking core on Saturday, Mike. Is that kind of the impression that you're getting there?
Yeah, asked Kirby about it last night. He said Monty is practicing, but then again, he was practicing last week, and he was a game-time scratch with his sprained MCL.
And then quickly here, it looks like Andrew Thomas is maybe in better shape here this week than he was a week ago, or am I getting out in front of myself by saying that?
No, I think you're fine. I saw Andrew at practice on Monday, whereas last week he wasn't even putting hardly any weight on it during practice on a Tuesday. Played 4 days later. Looked good in Monday's practice. Tyler Simmons, the guy that's likely out, has not practiced yet. Don't underestimate that. He was having a great season, a great perimeter blocker, and was one of the starters. And
then real quick to kind of wrap things up here, is it your expectation that it's probably Cade Mays at right guard, given the fact that maybe Thomas is playing on Saturday? Mays at right guard in place of the injured Ben Cleveland. Is that your best guess?
I'm not ready to say it quite yet as far as whether or not he starts in BA. You know, Georgia's been rotating a few guys there, but a part of me wonders, and we can speculate, maybe Kirby wants Cade to come in. I don't know. He'll either throw him out there and start him because of the emotion, or maybe he brings him in a little later saying, you know what, let's make sure Cade's not a little too juiced up here, doesn't jump early. I think we'll see him play some at right guard. In fact, I think we'll probably see a couple guys play there. But I'm not ready to call who's starting there yet. I think that's still to be determined.
Hey, great stuff, Mike. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate that. You're on top of that beat over there in Athens, and we enjoy talking to you, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Enjoy the show, B.A. Thank you.
This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff there from Mike Griffith. Really interesting, especially there at the end, kind of going through some of the injury stuff. Mike brings up a good point. Rice was practicing last week and didn't really play. But in terms of Georgia's ability to stop the run, my assumption here is that Rice is a key component in that. I think that you do want to see more, just to be maybe overly simplistic, you want to see more tackles from linebackers. And in a run-stop situation, I think that Rice may be Georgia's best option there, so hopefully that comes to pass here. Let's do our SEC Through, and as we transition to the SEC Through, I'll remind you that my friends at MyBookie have got a great offer right now. Now, MyBookie is the only service that DawgNation Daily would recommend, and there are a few reasons why. First of all, we believe in fast, no-hassle payouts when you do win, because, listen, when you get your action down, when you are a winner, you want your reward. You want to get that, and obviously MyBookie is going to offer that. They're the industry standard when it comes to the fast, no-hassle payout. And right now, what's even better is MyBookie's got a great offer for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers. You can get your first deposit matched dollar for dollar, but you got to use the promo code DawgNation. Here's how it works. You find MyBookie online, MyBookie, just as simple as that. Find MyBookie online, enter the promo code DawgNation. It's one word, spelled the way that it's supposed to be, DAWG. Use that promo code, and your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar. You are essentially a winner before you even start, because your account fills up with the reward, the bonus there from MyBookie. So check that out, and then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. Simple as that. MyBookie. Find them online, MyBookie, and then use the promo code DawgNation. Of course, we'll look forward to tomorrow, where we'll do our MyBookie best bets with some of the top SEC games from the weekend. Quick non-SEC story before we move on to the rest of our SEC Through content for today. As we were doing this show live here on a Wednesday morning, we find out just a few minutes ago that Kelly Bryant, the former Clemson starter, now he was replaced by Trevor Lawrence for this upcoming game for Clemson, Bryant, I guess, has indicated his intention to transfer. So just like that, you become the backup quarterback, and in Bryant's case, that's not good enough. He's leaving the program. I understand players want to play, but to so quickly throw in the white flag on a demotion here, this is a bad look for me for Bryant. Now, I understand. As I said, you want to be at a place where you can play. But to say, I'm not even going to stick this out, wait for a Lawrence injury, practice better than him, and retake that job before the end of the season, I don't like that look for Kelly Bryant. I'm all for liberal transfer rules. I'm all for guys getting to a place where they can be on the field. This is a bad decision by Kelly Bryant. It's a poor reflection of him. I have no idea who the backup quarterback at Clemson is going to become. And I guess in a roundabout way, it ends up being good news for Georgia if these two teams were to meet in the college football playoff. But I don't really like this look for Kelly Bryant, even though I support him being able to eventually transfer anywhere he wants to go. Speaking of that, I guess Alabama, maybe even more credit to Nick Saban here for his ability to avoid all this with Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. We didn't talk about this on Friday because I guess I just sort of, I hate to say this way, I sort of missed this quote, missed this story. I think we were so wrapped up in Georgia traveling to Missouri and the rest of the action. But on Friday, there was a really interesting story at ESPN.com about Saban's plans to continue using Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. The quote here from Nick Saban that he gave to Chris Lowe from ESPN, and boy, Lowe has really embedded himself in that Alabama program. It is amazing how cozy Saban's become with ESPN as of late. But the quote that Saban gives on this is, it's the same as it's always been, to use them both. It evolves a little bit as you go, Saban says. Our team has evolved. I can't tell you exactly how it will play out. It's going to be whoever helps our team play the best, and they both played a role in doing that. That's Nick Saban to ESPN about the idea of Jalen Hurts. So looks like Hurts may stay there. I think this is good for Alabama in the long run, which is probably bad news for Georgia, I have to admit. But nonetheless, I don't think that Mac Jones is the national championship quality backup. I think having Jalen Hurts, if he indeed is going to be there for the rest of the season, works out pretty well. Now, what's weird here is we've talked about the other state school there in Alabama, Auburn, and the transfer issues that it has dealt with. Apparently, according to reporting from AL.com, it almost had two more, and at least one of these is a pretty eye-opening name. Matt Zennett's doing some work here for AL.com, saying on the heels of Nate Craig Myers leaving the program that you almost had two other guys leave the program. What Zennett's wrote is that running back Cam Martin and wide receiver Sal Cannella both gave thought to utilizing the new redshirt rule and transferring, but recently met with the coaches and have decided to remain with the program, sources told AL.com. That is Matt Zennett's there. To give you a little context here, Cam Martin is the number 3 running back for Auburn right now. This would be a little bit like had DeAndre Swift decided to transfer last year. I mean, a number 3 running back is a guy that you use, and in Auburn's case, I guess maybe they weren't using Cam Martin enough. He almost left the program. Why is Auburn such a drama farm? I will never quite understand that. Speaking of Auburn, I thought Wally Hall from the Arkansas Democratic Gazette did kind of an interesting column. Now, he's been beaten up about this badly everywhere because there is a particular line here that seems a little silly. But if you read the totality of the column, it actually kind of makes some sense. What Wally Hall wrote on the heels of Arkansas, the home state school that he covers, losing to Auburn 34-3, was that the truth was Arkansas was as good as Auburn, he says. The defense played well enough to win, and the offense was better. That's Wally Hall, Arkansas Democrat Gazette. He's gotten beaten to death for saying that because obviously the score was as bad as it was. But if you read the column, what you find out, and this is a useful thing to remember, especially for those of you that may bet against Auburn at some point this year, that score does not get as lopsided as it did against Arkansas, if not for some horrible special teams blunders by the Razorback. That was the point of his column, and from that standpoint, I don't think Hall is necessarily wrong. I'll rattle through a couple others here real quickly. Kentucky has been fined $100,000 for its celebration after beating Mississippi State on Saturday. We'll show you some of this on the screen here. Their fans charged the field, a lot of selfies, a lot of students there on the field after the win against Mississippi State. I imagine for Kentucky fans, this will end up feeling like $100,000 well spent, although I did see where Matt Jones from Kentucky Sports Radio said he didn't feel like Kentucky got its money's worth. Maybe no goalpost came down, maybe great celebration took place. So for what did happen on the field on Saturday, Kentucky did get fined $100,000. And then finally, one more final story for our SEC through here. Have you seen what's happened with the point spread? Speaking of Kentucky hosting South Carolina on Saturday, looking for 5 straight wins in that series against the Gamecocks. Really wild line movement here. Depending on where you were looking for the point spread, it either opened as South Carolina as a slight favorite or an even point spread there for the Kentucky-South Carolina game. And then almost immediately people reacted to the Kentucky side of this, put a lot of money on Kentucky. They have now moved at most places to kind of a slight favorite here, which is not that unusual, but to see it happen as quickly as it did earlier in the week, a lot of folks weighing in on what should be a really good game on Saturday between South Carolina and Kentucky will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, let's turn our attention back to the Georgia Bulldogs, what's going to happen on Saturday against Tennessee. And with that in mind, I thought that Kirby Smart earlier this week gave two pretty nice compliments to a couple of Georgia's senior leaders, at least some of those. One on offense, one on defense. Let me start with DeAndre Walker, who, as Chip Towers wrote at DawgNation.com this week, is quietly putting together a pretty impressive season. He is leading the way for Georgia's pass rush, which was better against Missouri than had been against any opponent thus far this season. Kirby Smart likes what he's seeing from Walker, but as he explains, he'd expect nothing less.
I think DeAndre's grown into this role. I thought he had his best game of the four he's played last week. I would have expected nothing less because he's a leader on our team. He's a very motivated kid. He plays so hard. It's important to him. He still has room for improvement. He'll be the first to tell you he had some missed assignments in the game that he didn't do what he was supposed to do. He didn't play with discipline. But overall, he had a very productive game, mainly because of how hard he plays. He's a tough, good football player, winner that probably a lot of people have overlooked throughout his career because he's behind other guys. But he had a good game the other day, and certainly appreciate the production he had in the game because when you ask other coaches, he's hard to block.
Well, speaking of being overlooked, Walker probably was. Last year had great stats, but playing behind Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy will kind of hurt you in regards to your attention. On the other side of the ball, another Georgia leader is probably much more overlooked than really even Walker is, and that's Lamont Gilliard, who could be, frankly, an All-American candidate by the end of the season and whose role on this Georgia team right now made all the more important because of what we just talked to Mike Griffith about. The continued injury of Andrew Thomas, which we're waiting to see just how healthy he looks on Saturday. What happens for Georgia at right guard while Ben Cleveland is away dealing with an injury. Left guard still a little bit up in the air for Georgia. The rock there in the middle, the leader of that Georgia offensive line, Gilliard, all the more important, and Kirby Smart pointed that out too.
I think he's the rock. You know, you got one guy in there, and that's always one of the toughest positions to replace is that position because that's the cog, that's the voice, that's the leader, that's the guy who handles it all. And Lamont's done a good job of that, communicating across the board, different fronts, different movements, different looks. He's the guy that leads that group through vocal and through kind of being the guy that's done it the most. So it's important to have him part of it. But, you know, all that stuff factors in. Continuity is really important in the offensive line. And whether Andrew's beside Solly or Cade's beside Solly, that guy in the middle is one of the centerpieces, and he's done a good job leading that group.
I think for most Georgia fans, they really came to believe and respect Gilliard over the course of the 2017 season. We all remember those late season moments where those videos, replays, would show up, especially with that great overhead camera you see for all the big games of Gilliard just mauling people on the field there as the Georgia center there in the late stage of the 2017 season. And now as an anchor, as Kirby says, a rock, a leader of the Georgia offensive line, he is incredibly valuable now, given the fact that some of these other offensive line positions, because of injury, all of a sudden don't look quite so settled anymore. All right, we will wrap up here, and we do it every day at this time. We believe that Georgia fans are supposed to be Gator haters. Now, luckily, I hear from those of you every single day who are like, BA, we're up to the challenge on that. We're going to be Gator haters. In 31 days from now, Gator haters will rejoice once again as Georgia knocks off those lousy, stinking Gators. It's our Gator Hater Countdown right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and I cannot wait for that. I will also say this, as I mentioned off the top of the show, or near the top of the show, Heisman odds re-released, Las Vegas Superbook there, Brett McMurphy reporting on that. DeAndre Swift mentioned there as a potential, I don't want to say finalist, but among the favorites, still at 50-1. Jake Fromm kind of the same way. Heisman attention, though, proving to be a bit of a fickle mistress for McCole Hardman. Last week, the ESPN Heisman poll of their riders, Hardman got a fifth-place vote. This week, even though he scored a long touchdown on Saturday, that fifth-place vote had been taken away. So better luck next time, McCole. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, we'll take some of your comments here. I don't know if y'all saw that. Probably don't even really care. But it was kind of funny last week to see, because you scroll through that stuff. You're probably like me. I'm looking through there to see, does a Georgia player get mentioned? Last week, McCole got the fifth-place vote. I was like, well, that's something. You know, listen, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first single step, as you're very well aware of. And Hardman got his fifth-place vote last week. Did not get it this week, which seems – I'm going to take that more seriously than I should, but it seems unfair. I mean, he had a good game on Saturday. How about giving him the fifth place vote here? Hayes Calloway checking in to say, hey, B.A. Hayes, thanks for being with us. Willie Gray Jr. says, where are the Gator Hater shirts? I need some new ones. Yeah, Willie, I need some new ones too. So we were talking about our T-shirt stock the other day. Unfortunately, we only have a small number. I guess come to find I thought we had 0 Gator Hater shirts. Come to find out, we may have a small number of the red ones left. Maybe we have like 1 or 2 of the original black. That's now kind of, I'm kidding when I say this tongue-in-cheek, that's now become a sort of our collector's item because that was our first ever T-shirt, and we have not restocked those covers and may never do it again. So, you know, I'd love to get some more Gator Haters. I'd love to do like a new design. I have another design for a Gator Hater that I think would be really fun to do, but it's just a matter of, do we get a chance to actually do that? Richard Smith says, can we buy one somewhere? So, Richard, we used to have a store and we'd sell all the Gator Hater T-shirts and a lot of that other kind of stuff as well. About a year or so ago, my boss has kind of changed the philosophy on that, moving more towards an idea of, instead of selling one to you, $25 is about the price that something like that has to be, just to sort of absorb the shipping costs and the production cost. The T-shirt ends up being kind of an expensive T-shirt. We can charge a sponsor $25 for it and give it to you guys for free. And that's kind of what the new mentality around all of that stuff has been. The only downside is that demand always exceeds supply, which I certainly appreciate your support there in that regard. Philip Jordan Wells says, Heisman, we don't need no sneaking Heisman. Yeah, I think a lot of Georgia fans probably agree. If the team keeps winning, then the postseason accolades will either take care of themselves or be inconsequential. Ryan Henderson says, will South Carolina bring Kentucky back to earth? I think Ryan's asking a pretty good question here. He says, that Snell kid thinks he's something. Yeah, boy, it is amazing. Kentucky has got 2 of the all-time trash talkers on its team right now. Between Snell on the offensive side of the ball and the Cash Daniel kid whose video we always show. Now, I'm partial to Daniel because, he cracks the water bottles together and drinks them like Stone Cold. And the truth is, Snell he's kind of got his pro wrestling persona down because he's got his tattoo of his name on his chest, and he just talks a lot of trash like pro wrestlers kind of do. So it is kind of interesting to see in a day and age in which most of the SEC is getting pretty bland. I mean, a Georgia player is never going to say anything interesting. I mean, you could wake a Georgia player up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're going to roll right into some coach speak. That's just the way it works. Alabama, for the most part, is the same way, with the exception, I guess, of the occasional errant Jalen Hurts quote. It is really weird to see 2 SEC guys for a very good team right now who are as outspoken as Snell and Cash Daniel are for the Wildcats. I know that I'm like in the 99.99999% percentile when it comes to a lot of this stuff. I think that Kentucky-South Carolina is just going to be an awesome game on Saturday. I think it's really, really interesting. As we were saying before, it's kind of fun to watch that point spread. I think Vegas was telling the truth when it installed South Carolina as a slight favorite to begin the week. I think Vegas was telling you what they were doing, what they thought about the game. I think the reaction is probably an overreaction to these Kentucky wins. I think being good 3 weeks in a row is really, really hard. I think it's even hard for good teams. It remains to be seen yet if Kentucky is one of those. But even for a good team, being good 3 weeks in a row is hard. I think that for the most part, the story of college football is things are never quite as good as they seem or never quite as bad as they seem. Even with what Kirby Smart said about Tennessee a moment ago. Do you remember that off the top of the program when he was talking about how the turnovers impact that game and make it seem worse than it is? I don't think that means that Tennessee can play close against Georgia, but I don't believe that if you replay Tennessee-Florida, you get the final score likely what you got against the Gators and the Vols before. This is not some blowout in favor of Florida. Now, bad teams turn the ball over. I do get that. But I think that you're going to see a lot of market correcting in the days ahead. I think that, Mississippi State probably due to play better. I think that's a tough spot for Joe Moorhead on Saturday and with a really passionate crowd, but on the heels of a bad game, State's probably due for a better game. Florida, on the heels of a big-time road win, asking that program to do that 2 weeks in a row, I think is way too much there in that regard. I think Mississippi State's about a touchdown favorite, maybe just more than that. I think they probably now cover that number pretty easy. And I think that South Carolina and Kentucky is much the same way. People have a negative opinion of South Carolina on the heels of getting blown out by Georgia. that program earned some medal last week by beating Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt now probably better than we initially thought here. And on the road against Kentucky, the extra motivation because they've lost 4 years in a row, believe it or not, to the Wildcats. That feels like a pretty good spot for South Carolina. The only issue to sort of think about as a contrarian viewpoint to that is the same thing that I thought was going to give South Carolina fits against Georgia, inability of the defensive line to stop the run. That could be really true against Kentucky as well, because how well has that Kentucky offensive line played? One of the sneaky good things that Mark Stoops has done there is you remember, if you ever fly to Cincinnati, the Cincinnati airport's in Kentucky. So Kentucky is almost in Ohio, right? You've got a connection to a pretty talent-rich area for high school football there in sort of southern Ohio. And Stoops has brought some offensive linemen in from that Ohio region, and that's really starting to pay off there. Good stuff. All right, let me hit some more comments, and I'm sure some of you are saying, can we talk about Georgia? Matt Rukavina says, BA, not only do I want to win and a shutout, I want to beat Tennessee so badly it sets their program back years. Matt, I understand where you're coming from on this. Tomorrow we'll have David Green on the program, and one of the things I was thinking about is Green beat Tennessee for his first 3 years, 2001, 2002, 2003. And really that was the 2003 game was a series of 4 straight for Georgia against Tennessee. After that, the Georgia-Tennessee rivalry never quite felt the same way again, even though Georgia lost the heartbreaker in 2004, frustrating games in 06 and 07. There were some bad games for Georgia against Tennessee, but it was more about why is Georgia not playing better against kind of a mediocre opponent, as opposed to what the Tennessee game was viewed as in the 90s. Tennessee was just as much of a grizzly bear for Georgia to deal with as Florida was. Tennessee was very good back then. Peyton Manning, that'll help your program to have him for 4 years. Tennessee did. From that stretch of the entirety of the beginning of conference play, divisional play in the SEC, Georgia lost every one of those games, right? Every game in the 90s to Tennessee up until the year 2000. And some of those were just bad blowouts. Some of them were heartbreakers. The 95 game comes to mind. At some point in time, we should probably talk to Robert Everts about that. That was a Georgia team that could have almost beaten Tennessee on the road back in 95, when beating Tennessee on the road would have been a very big deal. But it just seemed like at the time a mountain too tall to climb, too steep to climb. So when someone like Matt Rukavina says, I want to beat Tennessee so bad it sets them back years and years and years, that's a guy who probably remembers some of that. Now, also, some of y'all, get into these gripes with the Tennessee fans on the message boards and the social media, and that sort of, adds fuel to the rivalry. But for older guys like me, a lot of what makes Tennessee and Georgia special is the memories of back when beating the Vols was like just a bridge too far for Georgia. So good stuff there. Let me get a few more comments here. Ken Feinberg says ESPN ranks Kentucky as the 4th best team in the SEC. Just on the basis of what they've accomplished thus far this season, it's easy to understand why that is. Philip Jordan Wells says Kentucky is beatable. They didn't really win the game versus Mississippi State until the late 4th quarter. They believe they're elite like us, though. Rat poisoning. Yeah, listen, if that's the air they think they are in, they are obviously kidding themselves in that regard. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment. Kid says, out of the last 10 games, UT has only won like 3. Is it really a rivalry? So, Kid, this is where there is a generational divide here. You may be a good bit younger than me. For people my age, Georgia-Tennessee will always be a rival. Now, for me, it's a little bit of a rivalry like this week, LSU's playing Ole Miss. I was telling some people before the show started today. That's actually one of my favorite SEC rivalries, because what you get in the SEC is you get the number 2 rivalry. Ole Miss's biggest rival will always be Mississippi State. There are no 2 teams in college football that hate each other more than Ole Miss and Mississippi State do. I mean, the athletic directors and the people associated with the program sound like fans, the way that they talk about each other. That is a great, and super intense rivalry Ole Miss and Mississippi State is. But below that, Ole Miss's number 2 rivalry is LSU, that Magnolia Bowl, as they call it. That's a really cool rivalry. The SEC has a lot of those secondary rivals. Georgia and Tennessee are secondary rivals. I think that Georgia for sure cares more about Auburn, cares more about Florida, probably even cares more about Georgia Tech. But that sort of secondary rival, Georgia-Tennessee is a pretty good one. even, go back to the 80s, Georgia and Tennessee weren't playing every year back then. But it was still kind of viewed as a rivalry game for Georgia when it did pop up on the schedule. And certainly on the heels of Philip Fulmer and Tennessee just being a lot for Georgia to deal with, that still kind of has the feel of a rivalry game for me. K9 Blues says, BA, Tennessee is a rival, but now South Carolina, or as he calls it, SC Junior. That's an example of a non-rivalry where only one side thinks it's one. That's probably true. For South Carolina, that's probably viewed more as a rivalry than it is for Georgia. When I talk about Georgia-South Carolina, I guess I would probably call it a rivalry for lack of a better phrase. Georgia-Vanderbilt's a series. Georgia-Kentucky is a series. Georgia-Tennessee is a rivalry. South Carolina probably somewhere in the middle of that, but pretty clearly, as K9 said, it's a lot bigger deal for the other side than it is for Georgia. I believe South Carolina fans could tell us more about this, but I believe that South Carolina kind of views Georgia as its second biggest rival. Now, as we've said now a million times, one of the things that makes Georgia unique is the fact that Georgia has a lot of rivalries. I mean, just a lot of rivalries. How many programs, this may be a kind of a fun thing to sort of figure out one day. How many programs could lay claim to having as many legitimate rivalries as Georgia has? I mean, Georgia has at least 3 rivalries that have names. Because it's a decent-sized rivalry when it has a name. Georgia's got the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. It's got clean old-fashioned hate. It's got the Deep South oldest rivalry. I don't know if Border Bash here counts in terms of Georgia-South Carolina, but that's at least 3 rivalry series for Georgia that have commonly known, well-established names. And then that's not even getting to Georgia-Tennessee, which, I think both sides would say, yes, that is a rivalry here. Are there that many schools that can say they've got at least 3 super legit rivalries where there's healthy hatred on both sides? And then in the case of Tennessee, maybe South Carolina, another, kind of second-tier level rivalry. Mike D says every game's a rivalry. I understand that, and the competitive SEC can kind of feel that way. But what I'm telling you is, and maybe you got to be 40 to feel this way. I don't know. Maybe there's a very good chance that you just got to be 40, got to have a little gray in your hair to feel this way. But I'm going to Athens on Saturday expecting to see a rivalry game because I have been in that stadium when it wasn't nothing but Tennessee fans dancing and celebrating and, waving at Georgia fans on their way out the gate there. So for me, it still feels like a rivalry. What's that, viral video with the pro wrestling guy where he says it's still real to me? Listen, it's still a rivalry to me, even if some of y'all have decided that Tennessee doesn't matter anymore. Mike D says, part of the number of rivals is due to Georgia having a lot of states that surround it, a lot of big programs. That's certainly possibly true. Amos Williams says, I hate Alabama more than I hate Florida. Yeah, I know where that's kind of coming from as of late here. Miriam Martin Corbin talking about Cade Mays, who's got a lot of expectations around him for a few reasons on Saturday, both in terms of just the fact that he's an important part of this Georgia offensive line right now, and you know that he's going to be hearing a lot of junk from those Tennessee players during the game, and I'm sure he'll maintain his composure, and I'm sure he'll do his talking on the field there, and I'm sure that Georgia fans will love the outcome when all that's concerned. Kibo Weir checking in with some nice words. Appreciate that. I will say this, and I hesitate to do this because it's kind of off-brand for me, but it is kind of amazing how visceral the feelings that Georgia fans have for Auburn is. As much as I've tried to push the Gatorade rivalry, and I knew when I started that there was going to be a little bit of pushback from people who just sort of felt differently. I was in Athens downtown the other day when LSU beat Auburn, and the roar that goes up in the crowd here at the particular establishment where I was, and I'm sure all establishments were kind of the same way, the roar that goes up was just, it was authentic, and people were so glad that Auburn lost, and it really served as a reminder for me of just how much Georgia fans enjoy seeing bad stuff happen to Auburn. Chris Sapp says he feels the same way. He goes, I hate them dang Vols. I live in Chattanooga, surrounded by them. Boy, I know. There are a lot of good Georgia fans who live in Chattanooga, y'all. Dalton, right there next to Chattanooga, that is a hotbed for Georgia fans. Great dog fans live up there in what is a kind of a beautiful part of the world, really, and certainly a great part of DawgNation. Can you imagine what it's like in Chattanooga this week? Now, I'm sure that Georgia fans probably they may be given a little more than they're getting this week, if you get my drift on that. But Chattanooga is like that. That is that hotbed of Georgia-Tennessee rivalry stuff. And for a lot of people, it's wherever you live is the rivalry you care the most about. You know, people in Rome are kind of the same way. A lot of Rome, Georgia natives, you know, have some especially stuff dealing. John Anthony checking in from Dalton. A lot of great Georgia fans live in Dalton. Dalton's a great football town in general. They love their high school football up there in Dalton, and they love that Georgia-Tennessee rivalry up there for sure. But a lot of this does sort of come from where you're from. And as I said, John Anthony checking in from Dalton, which is kind of a cool thing to see. Randy Pearson says probably one of the best calls by months in that hobnail boot. Yeah, I'd imagine that'd come up with David Green tomorrow. I know we talked about that a little bit last week with him when he mentioned that he thought that Veron Haynes might be at Tailgate Apparel tomorrow. Philip Jordan. In our comment section, Philip Jordan Wells says Chattanooga is just Macon with a bigger river. That's a really funny line, Philip. That made me laugh for sure. Really good stuff. But yeah, I have great memories of that hobnail boot game in 2001. Really fun stuff. I've got great memories of the 2003 game when Georgia blew out Tennessee there in Neyland Stadium. And obviously for those of you who had a chance, I was not at the game last year, but lucky enough to be in Neyland Stadium last year for the 41-0 blowout. I know that a lot of you will remember that forever and ever and ever. So that's all really fun. We have got to go. We have got a lot we got going on here on the world headquarters of DawgNation here today. So let me go take care of that. Don't forget, by the way, this afternoon, 3 p.m., Before the Hedges makes its triumph return. Myself and Jeff Sintel with a lot of recruiting talk. Really good stuff there. And we'll look forward to seeing you then for that. If you missed a portion of our regular broadcast, we'll have the podcast up and running for you here in just a couple of minutes. And then back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day, and I'll look forward to seeing you then.